It's 5:05 and welcome into a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We are learning details this morning about the first Helene interest-free loans that are making their way to municipalities, towns, cities, and areas in western North Carolina. Those are officially on the move. North Carolina State Treasurer Brad Briner's office yesterday announced that it is distributing more than $73 million in the first round of interest-free loans to local governments in the western half of our state. In a press release yesterday, he said, quote, "We had a big goal on a short deadline, and we're excited to announce that help is on the way." Jeff Poley and his team worked relentlessly to create the program from the bottom up, recognizing, as we all did, the residents of western North Carolina need rapid resources to restore upended lives and rebuild neighborhoods. Poley, the director of the Disaster Services and Rural Economic Development for Briner's office, said loans totaling over $73.5 million had been approved for 98 local governments as of February the 21st, so just back a couple days ago last week. The release states that a portion of the $100 million is being held because some local governments experienced hurricane loss and damage, making completing the necessary documentation difficult. So they're reserving just a little bit of that for towns and municipalities that have not been able to file their paperwork. Recent winter storm closures complicated the problem. Poley is working with the local governments to complete their applications by an extended deadline coming out of the treasurer's office. The funding comes from the $100 million cash flow loan program under Senate Bill 382. That was the Disaster Recovery Act of 2024. That was passed last year shortly after the storm moved into the area and became law in December. Its goal is to help local governments whose communities were devastated by Hurricane Helene while they wait for federal money to arrive. The administrator of the program was assigned to the state treasurer's office. At a Council of State meeting earlier this month, Briner stated that the new division had worked with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners and the League of Municipalities to gather feedback from affected local governments. It had also communicated with legislators from western North Carolina to develop a lending agreement, create a fair allocation methodology, and establish accountability measures to safeguard taxpayer dollars, as these funds are loans and not grants, meaning that money will in fact have to be paid back. Briner said during the meeting, quote, "When we hit this goal at the end of the month, we will have to build this program faster than the legislation that created it was passed, and twice as fast as the last time North Carolina tried to do any kind of blending of this sort. The Department of the State Treasurer obviously cannot approximate tax dollars nor execute this important work of physically rebuilding the western part of the state. But we can fulfill our statutory responsibility well. We'll make sure that pension payments are paid, we'll provide health insurance, and we'll safeguard the funds of the state in so many ways." Poley said, quote, "More loans will be issued in the coming weeks as we continue to work through the unavoidable challenges." He thanked the North Carolina League of Municipalities, the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, the Department of Emergency Management, and other folks for helping get the program up and running. One of the hardest hit communities is Mitchell County's Spruce Pine area. Mayor Phil Hayes there said in the release that he was grateful to receive $2.8 million in terms of a cash flow zero interest loan that the town is receiving. He told the Carolina Journal, quote, "Our town has accumulated several $million in debt to contractors and engineering debt for repairs made to our sewer and water systems. This money will be used to pay the debts while waiting for the federal government and their funds." Under the cash flow loan program, local governments must provide damage assessments to the North Carolina Department of Emergency Management. Those assessments are used to calculate loan amounts. The governing boards of impacted local governments need to vote to approve acceptance of the interest-free loans, and requests from school districts are channeled through their county governments. There is a full list on the Treasurer's website this morning of everybody that has received money in this first round. Again, over $73.5 million, all of the towns receiving money. The largest group and the largest amount of money going to Buncombe County. As you can imagine, the city of Asheville there, they received just under $8.5 million. And, of course, Chimney Rock, which was, for all intents and purposes, wiped off the map. The village of Chimney Rock receiving $7.7 million. You can view that full link by checking out our article this morning over at CarolinaJournal.com. The headline, First Helene Interest-Free Loans on the way to Western NC local municipalities. Great work there from the Treasurer's Office. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. North Carolina Republicans in the General Assembly want to crack down on state officials who may not be complying with federal immigration policies enacted by the Trump administration. Senate Leader Phil Berger from Rockingham County, alongside Senators Warren Daniel and Buck Newton, filed the North Carolina Border Protection Act, or Senate Bill 153, yesterday in the General Assembly to ensure that state law enforcement officials are cooperating with federal immigration laws and that residents are protected from sanctuary city policies. In a press release, Berger's office outlined the legislation, which specifically requires Governor Josh Stein's administration to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It holds municipalities and counties accountable if they create sanctuary policies, and it protects taxpayers by ensuring that public benefits are only provided to eligible individuals. The leader of the North Carolina Senate said in a press release, quote, North Carolinians are seeing the harmful impacts of open border policies, from dangerous drug trafficking to criminal illegal aliens being released from jail to roam our streets freely. North Carolinians made it clear that they will no longer tolerate sanctuary policies that put them at risk. We must send an equally strong message by requiring Governor Josh Stein's administration to cooperate with immigration officials. One of the central elements of the bill is increased cooperation between state agencies and ICE. Under the proposed law, several state law enforcement agencies, including the Department of Public Safety, Department of Adult Corrections, as well as State Highway Patrol and the SBI, that's the State Bureau of Investigation, are required to enter into formal agreements with ICE. The agreements would allow designated state law enforcement officials to perform immigration duties under federal supervision. Additionally, the agencies would also be required to determine the immigration status of any person in custody or under its supervision. We'll have some more details on this piece of legislation, Senate Bill 153, the North Carolina Border Protection Act, coming up for you a little bit later on this morning. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:13, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic on your Tuesday morning early commute. An update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour, streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. Don't forget that you can take the show with you on demand by checking out the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. It's available wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour in your favorite podcast app. Tap the subscribe or follow button, and you can take the show with you on demand on your own time. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. Well, North Carolina disabled veterans could soon be receiving additional financial relief from rising property taxes under new legislation that was introduced in the General Assembly. Senate Bill 128, the Heroes Homestead Act, seeks to raise the property tax homestead exclusion from $45,000 to over $76,000 a year, offering greater financial relief for veterans starting in 2026. The proposal comes as property values continue to skyrocket across the state of North Carolina, which has raised property taxes and narrowed the veteran tax benefit. In a comment to Carolina Journal, Senator Michael Lazzara of Onslow County explained that the tax benefit has become less impactful as property values have continued to rise. He expressed optimism about the bill moving forward this year, noting that it will not impact the state's tax revenue. He told the Carolina Journal, quote, "North Carolina has one of the largest military footprints in the country, and our state is growing rapidly. As property values and therefore property taxes have risen, this veterans benefit has remained stagnant. The legislation will not affect the state's tax revenue, and if we receive a favorable report from the Rules Committee, our chance of passing it this year looks very strong." Other co-sponsors include Senators Benton Sworey from Johnston County, Todd Johnson from Union County, who emphasized the importance of honoring those who have served by providing disabled veterans and their families the security and stability that they've earned. Senator Johnson said our disabled veterans shouldn't have to worry about losing their home due to rising property taxes. This bill delivers real financial relief and shows that North Carolina values and supports those who have sacrificed in the service of our country. There are over 600,000 veterans in North Carolina, according to 2022 data, of which 183,000, or 29% of them, have a disability rating. The bill would take effect for taxable years beginning on or after July 1st, 2026, reinforcing North Carolina's commitment to its veteran community. A nearly identical bill filed Monday by Senator Bobby Helene of Currituck County also seeks to enhance disabled veterans' property tax exclusions. However, that piece of legislation, Senate Bill 143, slashes the $45,000 exemption and instead removes the exclusion cap altogether, regardless of the home's appraised value. The senator, who is a veteran himself, did not immediately respond to requests for comment from Carolina Journal. He also co-signed legislation on Monday that would expand property tax relief for elderly and disabled. That's Senate Bill 135, which proposes increase in income eligibility limits for the elderly or disabled in terms of their property tax. That current limit is $25,000 a year. This new legislation would increase that to $48,000 a year, starting with the taxable year beginning July 1st of 2025. You can read more details on this legislation this morning by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:24. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Congressman Richard Hudson, who's also the chair of the NRCC, spoke with the Carolina Journal exclusively back a couple of weeks ago about some of his legislative priorities moving forward. To get some more details on that, let's join Katie Zehnder from carolinajournal.com, who spoke with Congressman Hudson. Katie, good morning to you. Appreciate the time. Tell us a little bit about this conversation you had with the congressman.
Hi, good morning, Nick. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, I was able to sit down with Congressman Hudson for an exclusive interview. He held an event at the Family Traditions Gun Range in Burlington, North Carolina, where he spoke to his constituents about a couple pieces of legislation he has introduced in the past month or so. One is been getting a lot of traction. It's the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. And then the second one is the Protecting Privacy and Purchases Act, which is also related to gun legislation and Second Amendment issues. So he's introduced these two pieces of legislation in the last couple of months, and I was able to speak with him about both of these bills, as well as legislative priorities for the NRCC, moving forward. And so with the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act, this is not the first time that he has introduced this act. He's introduced it, I know, at least 3 times in previous years, if not more. He did speak specifically about 6 years ago. He was able to introduce this bill and get it through the House, but it didn't make it through the Senate. He couldn't get any traction in the Senate. And so this bill is really important to him. He says concealed carry is important because law-abiding citizens are trying to do the right thing, trying to be safe, but are still vulnerable to becoming criminals because they cross state lines, maybe even unwittingly or not knowing about it. And it's just because there's such a hodgepodge of different state laws. So it's really about protecting those law-abiding citizens. And then he goes on. So this is a bill that's really important to him. And I talked to him about, what are the benefits of these bills for gun owners and how do they complement each other? And he said, we should focus our law enforcement, particularly when it comes to guns and gun violence, on the criminals in the same way that trying to prevent states from being able to ban gun sales or create registries of gun purchases. It's just about protecting the rights of law-abiding citizens. So the other act that he introduced is the Protecting Privacy in Purchases Act. So what this act does is it bans merchants from putting a code on gun sales at gun stores. And so this is called the Merchant Category Code. And the code, if it's put on gun sales, is used to actually track these guns and where they're going. And so this bill, if it's passed, would prevent merchants from tracking these gun sales with a code. And so Hudson said, I feel very hopeful that now is the time to get this done. The Protecting Privacy in Purchases Act is really important. And he really feels that there are liberal states that want to track gun purchases. He said he believes it's for nefarious purposes. He thinks that either they want to create a gun registry or they want to eventually get to the point where they can outlaw gun sales completely. And he doesn't want to give them the tools and the power to do that. He says there's no reason to single out gun purchases. And so both of these bills are very important to gun owners.
Well, you talk about the reciprocity element of it, Katie. For folks that live in the northern half of our state, if you happen to just pop across the Virginia border, you're committing a felony unless you also have a concealed carry permit in the state of Virginia, which for many folks in North Carolina, they don't. It's a very easy ride across the border. That's a big deal.
Right, that's exactly right. And that's kind of the example that he gave. So, kind of unifying these gun laws across the board so that people can travel, with their concealed carry permit and they don't have to worry about crossing state lines is really important to him, and it's important to gun owners. And so one of the things I asked him was, why do you think that it's going to be different this time in getting this bill to actually become law? Because we know that he's introduced it a number of times in the past several years. So I asked him, why do you think it's going to be different this time? And why do you feel confident that you can get this through and passed to become law? So there are a couple of things. First of all, back in the fall, I believe it was in October, now President Donald Trump did promise during the campaign that if a concealed carry reciprocity bill made it to his desk, that he would sign it. But more importantly than that, Hudson spoke to the Senate. So that's really where the bill got stuck before, was in the Senate. And now we have a new Senate Majority Leader, Senator John Thune, who's a Republican out of South Dakota. And so Hudson really believes that he is confident in the fact that Thune can help him whip the votes to get this passed and to get it through the Senate and to get it to President Donald Trump's desk where it will be signed. Also, Senator John Cornyn, who's a Republican out of Texas, has introduced a companion bill as well. And so, he said between Thune and Cornyn, he really feels that now is the time to get this done. So he feels very confident that he will be able to get this passed and that it will be signed into law.
We'll continue the conversation with Katie Zehnder coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:29, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
It's 5:35. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Good Tuesday morning to you. We are tracking some details out of the General Assembly this morning. North Carolina residents could sue over sanctuary cities under a new Senate bill. This is introduced by the North Carolina General Assembly yesterday in an attempt to crack down on state officials who do not comply with federal immigration policies enacted by the Trump administration. Senate Leader Phil Berger introduced the North Carolina Border Protection Act, or Senate Bill 153, yesterday to ensure that state law enforcement officials are cooperating with federal immigration laws and that residents are protected from sanctuary city policies. In a press release, Berger's office outlined the legislation, which says it requires Governor Josh Stein's administration to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It holds municipalities and counties accountable if they create those sanctuary policies internally, and it protects taxpayers by ensuring public benefits are only provided to eligible individuals. Berger said in a press release, North Carolinians are seeing the harmful impacts of open border policies, from dangerous drug trafficking to criminal illegal aliens being released from jail to roam our streets freely. North Carolinians made it clear that they will no longer tolerate sanctuary policies that put them at risk. We must send a strong message by requiring Governor Stein's administration to cooperate with immigration officials. Under the proposed law, several state law enforcement agencies, including the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Adult Corrections, the State Highway Patrol, as well as the State Bureau of Investigation, are required to enter into formal agreements with ICE. The agreements would allow those designated state law enforcement officers to perform immigration enforcement duties under federal supervision. Additionally, the agencies would also be required to determine the immigration status of any person or persons in custody and under its supervision. The General Assembly passed legislation at the end of 2021 that mandates all sheriffs cooperate with ICE. This after a small group of left-leaning cities chose to not honor federal detainers, one of them being Mecklenburg County. Under the latest proposal, local governments and universities that fail to comply with state immigration laws will face penalties. The press release reads, while sanctuary policies are already prohibited in the state, and municipalities across the state continue to defy state law. To hold them accountable, any county or municipality that creates sanctuary cities will have its local immunity waived, therefore allowing citizens harmed by illegal immigrants to sue them. The bill also seeks to ensure that state benefits are provided exclusively to legal residents. The Office of State Budget and Management is tasked with auditing state-funded programs such as Medicaid, food and housing assistance, foster care, and other programs. That you can read more details this morning on this Senate Bill 153, by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:39. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Continuing our conversation this morning with Katie Zehnder on an exclusive interview she had with Congressman Richard Hudson about some things. We talked about gun control and some Second Amendment issue. But Katie, he also is a hugely influential figure in regards to the NRCC. Can you explain what the NRCC is and why that's relevant for folks here across the state of North Carolina?
Right. So the NRCC stands for the National Republican Congressional Committee, and it is a hugely influential body of, Republicans in Congress, in the House. These are the major Republican players, not only in the state, but, in the House, in the Republican caucus. And so they have a lot of influence over, policy issues, what bills are going to be pushed forward. So this is a very influential committee, and Hudson was recently reelected as the chair of that. He served as the chair in the last term and has been reelected again. So I was able to speak with him, about some of the priorities and initiatives that he sees the most support for in the caucus, especially considering we're kind of seeing a similar trend to what we saw in 2016, 2018, and we have midterms coming up here in 2026. So in 2016, Trump was elected to his first term, and then in 2018, we kind of see a backlash on the Republicans during the midterm elections, and there's a potential that we could see that again in 2026. That's a very common theme. So, whatever party is in power in the White House, you can see pushback on that. In the House and in Congress when it comes to midterm elections. So I asked him about, where do you see the most support for initiatives in the Republican Congress? He said their top priority is cutting spending, followed by securing the border and then unleashing American energy. He said, quote, I think cutting spending is a top priority for us. I think making sure the Trump tax cuts don't expire. If they do expire, it would be the largest increase in American history, said Hudson, and there are two major priorities. These are two major priorities for every Republican in Congress. So those are their top two priorities: is cutting spending and making sure that the Trump tax cuts don't expire.
Well, in regards to cutting spending, Katie, I mean, we've seen just over the last couple of weeks major initiatives being taken on by the president. He's doing a lot of it through Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, and some early polling on that. And again, I'll stress early polling on that shows some pretty broad support. Individuals seem to be in favor of getting the federal government in check, under control, and they're supportive of some of these measures that are taking place.
Right, exactly. So we have seen huge support for this across the board. I think even a little bit, on the Democratic side. And like you said, the early poll numbers, and again, these are still very early poll numbers, but show overall, strong support from the American people on cutting spending, and kind of bringing government agencies back into check and back into line. So, Hudson did say there is some disagreement in the Republican Congress about exactly, where to cut, how much to cut. But that's something that is going to be resolved as they work on the reconciliation bill. Each committee and jurisdiction is going to write their part of the bill. They're obviously going to debate it. And then, but ultimately, he said he believes the caucus will come together and achieve their goals. So he said, their number one goals are cutting spending and ensuring the tax cuts don't increase. But then he said, then I think it's securing the border, and I think it's unleashing American energy so we can drive down inflation and see the, quote, American Renaissance that President Trump has talked about. So we talked about those initiatives, and then we also kind of went back to, the trend that we saw in 2016, 2018, followed by, when Trump was elected to his first term, followed by the midterm elections. And, I asked him about, do you think that we're going to see this again with the 2016 midterm elections coming up? And, he said when Trump won his first term as president, and it was followed by the midterms, he thinks that the dynamic is so completely different because, in that first term when he was elected in 2016, he was a new president. People didn't know him. People were still getting to know him. And so he sees the political landscape as being, completely different. Now that this is his second term, people know him. They know what he believes. They know what he stands for. And we're seeing more and more, we're hearing this phrase repeated a lot over the last, 6 weeks or so since he's been inaugurated. People keep saying the words, promises made, promises kept. So people are seeing what Donald Trump is promising to do, and they're seeing him follow through. And so, people know who he is, they know what he stands for, and they believe that he's going to follow through on that. And that's something that's different from what we saw in 2016, 2018. So, Hudson said, I think the other difference is in 2018, they didn't know him, they didn't know what he stood for, and they overwhelmingly chose him over Kamala Harris for that reason. And so he says, I don't think the dynamics of the first term really apply in this situation. So it's definitely going to be interesting to watch this as the 2026 midterms come up and see if he's right. Are we going to see that backlash that we saw in 2016, 2018, or are we not going to see much of a change in Congress? So that's what he had to say.
Well, and, it's important for folks to remember, you go back to when Trump first got into office back in 2016, Katie, within the Republican Party, even the high ranks of elected officials within the Republican Party, people like the former Speaker of the United States House, were not big fans of Donald Trump. There was a very large anti-Trump contingent in Congress. That doesn't really exist anymore, so it probably lends itself very similar to what the congressman was saying in regards to those dynamics being completely different.
Right. That's exactly right, Nick. We are seeing more and more people, coming over to Trump's side. People that didn't necessarily like him in the beginning are coming over more and more. to support him. And, I think a lot of that is because they're seeing, policies put in place that are helpful to them. Under the Biden administration, we had all these policies that were hurting people, hurting American families, and they're seeing Donald Trump follow through on what he's promising, and they're seeing it actually benefit them in their daily lives, in their everyday. So I think this is a big part of it, Nick.
Katie, you got a lot more in this story that we don't have a chance to get into this morning. Where can folks go and read more and get some direct quotes from the congressman this morning?
Yeah, they can read the full article with all the quotes at carolinajournal.com.
Katie Zehnder joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:46, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic on this Tuesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
Hot. Good morning again. It's 5:52. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. We are tracking some details this morning in terms of local municipality relief from the devastation caused by Hurricane Helene in western North Carolina. North Carolina State Treasurer Brad Briner's office is doling out more than $73 million in the first round of interest-free loans to local governments in the western half of our state. The treasurer said in a press release yesterday, quote, "We had a big goal on a short deadline, and we are excited to announce that help is on the way." Jeff Poley and his team worked relentlessly to create the program from the bottom up, recognizing, as we all did, that the residents of western North Carolina needed rapid resources to restore upended lives and rebuild neighborhoods. Jeff Poley, the director of the Disaster Service and Rural Economic Development Group for Briner's office, said that loans totaling over $73.5 million have been approved for 98 local governments as of February the 21st, and some already had their allocations in hand, meaning they already had the money. The release states that a portion of the $100 million that was earmarked is being held because some local governments experienced hurricane loss and damage, making completing the necessary documentation incredibly difficult. Recent winter storm closures compounded the problem, and Jeff Poley is working with local governments to complete their applications by an extended deadline. The funding comes from a $100 million cash flow loan program under Senate Bill 382. That was the Disaster Recovery Act of 2024, which became law in December. Its goal is to help local governments whose communities were devastated by Hurricane Helene while they wait for federal money to arrive. The administration of the program was assigned to the state treasurer's office. At a Council of State meeting earlier this month, Briner stated that the new division has worked with the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners as well as the League of Municipalities to gather feedback from affected local governments. It has also communicated with legislators from western North Carolina, developed a lending agreement, create a fair allocation methodology, and establish accountability measures to safeguard taxpayer dollars, as it's important to note that these funds are loans and not grants, meaning that they will have to be paid back to the state. Briner said at that Council of State meeting, quote, "When we hit this goal at the end of the month, we will have built this program faster than the legislation that created it was passed, and twice as fast as the last time North Carolina tried to do any sort of blending of this sort. The Department of the State Treasurer obviously cannot appropriate taxpayer dollars nor execute the important work of physically rebuilding the western part of our state, but we can fulfill our statutory responsibilities well. We'll make sure that pension payments are paid, we'll provide health insurance, and we'll safeguard the funds of the state in so many ways." Jeff Poley said, quote, "More loans will be issued in the coming weeks as we continue to work through the unavoidable challenges that are taking place." One of the hardest hit communities is Mitchell County's Spruce Pine area. Mayor Phil Heiss there said that the release said in the release that he was grateful for the $2.8 million loan that town has received. He said, quote, "Our town has accumulated several $1 million in debt to contractors and engineering debt for repairs made to our sewer and water system. This money will be used to pay debts while waiting on the federal government for additional funds." Under the cash flow loan program, local governments must provide damage assessments to the North Carolina Department of Emergency Management. Those assessments are used to calculate loan amounts. The governing boards of impacted local governments needs to vote to approve acceptance of the low interest free loans, and requests for loans from school districts are being channeled through their county governments as just one sum of money to the county, who then can decide to give it to their school system. There is a full list of all of the allocations in this round one of Hurricane Helene cash flow loans, the largest amount of money going to Buncombe County $8.4 million being allocated to them. The town, or the village rather, of Chimney Rock, which you saw the complete and total devastation out of the Chimney Rock area, they have received $7.7 million. You can view the entire list, which includes municipalities all across the western half of our state, by visiting our website this morning at carolinajournal.com. Well, that's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. We've got a busy day in the North Carolina General Assembly today, multiple committee meetings that we'll be keeping an eye on. We'll have all those details coming up for you tomorrow morning. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We are back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.